Alright, the chassis overview video is finally here. This is just going to be a quick glance at all the chassis from the Turbo Nitro line. You have the V1 chassis, the VT chassis, MVT-N chassis, MVT-D chassis, MVT-S chassis, then finally the ZVT chassis. I'll add in pictures of the approximate weight. That includes the internal gears, by the way. Quick note, as the chassis evolves, the venting improves over each design. The V1 chassis is the first ever chassis where customization specifically for the chassis is set only for the front weapon, internal gears, the motor, and the rear bumper, not a weapon. This is the only chassis that is more of a lever versus a switch. Other things that pertain to how like a gear runs and acts I'll have in a separate setup video. The VT chassis, aka the 80 billion yen project for the mini engine labs themselves, has everything the old chassis has, but now boasts the ability to shift the battery box in 4 positions held via screw. The positions go as follows. You got a full dash at the front, rear middle, neutral, which is the same position as the V1 chassis, and full spin, rear. It also has the ability to run a rear weapon now. Minor note that this chassis has the underside of its switch cut. It should look like this. Opening the chassis cover, it's done by pushing the hooks outward. They're locked by a tab on the bottom panel of the chassis, which is then lifted up. Note the difference in chip design, where the V1 is a pure plastic, but the VT chassis has a nut, which is more secure, versus the plastic that are chip on a V1 chassis. The terminal as well, it's gotten a bit larger on contact. The V1 chassis can break on that battery box on, I don't know, maybe on an extremely hard hit. So there's one advantage for the later chassis. The hook design is a change from the V1 to VT chassis, where you could say the V1 hooks aren't as sturdy compared to the VT hooks. It's smaller but more compact with plastic and is less flex. Alright, so past these two chassis is where it technically falls under the Workstaff Originals line. The MVT-N is an upgraded redesign of the VT chassis. All new design style, not just aesthetically, but in practicality as well. The new chassis now supports compartmentalized areas separated for the motor and the internal gears. It's debatable for some people. Maybe some people like to just take off one panel instead of it just being split. The battery box now isn't specified to only 4 positions, but now has an easier way to change the battery box position with a slot to slide. There's an upside and downside to this, with that being the freedom of position, but unfortunately, there's also the possibility for wear on the battery box holder. And yes, you can have the ability, debatable as well, for a concept of a sliding battery box, just like the anime. That feature is also present in the MVT-S and ZVT chassis. The MVT-D is a specialized dash chassis with a height that's lower than your average chassis, by give or take like 5mm. Shout out to Tomorrow. This in turn lowers the center of gravity of the chassis, but in exchange it does not have the ability to shift the battery box, and is fixed in the neutral position. Same position, by the way, as the V1 chassis. It's a part of the chassis which always aids in a slightly lower weight. The anime mentioned this and I had to double check this myself, but yes, the weapon mounting is just slightly lower compared to, say, like using a VT chassis. Very minuscule though. The MVT-S, on the other hand, is a specialized spin chassis, where its design differs in the placement of where the rear axle sits. The rear axle sits higher than usual to accompany spin-type wheels, which in turn makes the gear sit flat instead of it having a raked setup. This would give it more of a characteristic of a flatter spin, so to say, but really, so when spins go fast enough, the gear lifts at the front. But still, I guess anything before that, I mean, yeah, it is a flatter spin. The perks of this can be debatable depending on who you talk to. Otherwise, it's a good characteristic that more or less lessens the weak point of a traditional spin type setup. Those are the entirety of the chassis from Turbo. Now, the final iteration of the crush gear chassis came from Nitro, which is the ZVT. The ZVT, other than having the best venting, has a couple of new additions specific to the chassis. It basically has a combination of the characteristics for the MVT-N and the MVT-S, but it's improved in form and function, you could say. It retains the sliding battery box feature, but the throw of the battery box is slightly longer, by, what was it, like 2 to 3mm or something? And you can argue that it's like the strongest chassis in terms of like weighted spin and dash, and that is if the gear is well balanced anyway. It also has the ability to change the rear axle height, with a chip that can swap between a normal stance and a higher stance to accommodate spin-type wheels. So, surprisingly, the chassis isn't the heaviest out of all of them. A couple of minor notes though, is this is the first chassis with a reverse switch and battery placement, which is due to how the terminals are placed, I believe. Nothing's taken from the MVT dash chassis. That's basically like an interior of its own. Chassis selections, like, I'm sure people have their arguments of what chassis is possibly the best to choose. Some people have like their personal theories toward things, I'm sure, in the Southeast Asia scene. Like, are some better than others at first glance? Definitely, for example, who in their right mind would want to use a V1 chassis these days? Cue that clip from Jin talking about the V1 chassis.
You know, these days nobody in their right mind would keep using a normal chassis.
And like unless they're keeping in mind it's lightweight when you know, you could use a VT chassis instead. Or why use an MVT N or S when you have a ZVT, etc. Why use anything but MVTD chassis? This can go on for like a little, but I suppose it's fun to find uses for specific chassis. That's it for the quick overview. I think in the near future I'll probably also doing deeper dives toward the chassis as well.